Coming up on the Payoff, Randy Grimes played 10 years in the NFL, was the man of the year in 1988, but all the while, as his career progressed, so did injuries, and then his addiction to painkillers took off. And with that, all the underlying issues that come with addiction. He lost everything, the money, the cars, the houses, but most importantly, his family. This is a conversation where I got to really enjoy the fact that we looked at the underbelly of the NFL in a sense. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the 80s had an open drug safe that people could just access. Players, obviously, could just access. But now the access that Randy has is the access to recovery, and he spreads that message to anyone who will listen. His book, Off Center, is out there, and it's terrific. He also does so much with pro athletes in recovery. And we'll have all those links in the show notes. But Randy Grimes is a great man, and he's got an incredible story. Kevin Souza.
Hello.
Randy Grimes.
Yes.
Hey, what's up, man? Pete Souza. How you doing?
Pete, what's up, buddy? How are you doing?
Well, the book is Off Center. And the reason I want to talk about the book right away, Randy, is because Mike Ditka calls it a playbook for getting back into the game of life. And you played 10 years in the NFL. You're more than 12 years sober.
13.
13 years. And, here you are today. You carry the message of recovery. What was it like for you to put that book together?
Well, it was a healing process for my family, and that was the intention all along, was for everybody that was affected by my addiction to have a platform and to share what they went through and their experience. And, it was always meant to just kind of be a healing tool for the Grimes family. And, I didn't really care how popular it was out there because everybody has a great story, and all of them are bestsellers. But
That's cool.
I felt like I needed help, putting the timeline together. So I had somebody help me put everything back like it was supposed to be, because, the way I remember things aren't exactly the way they really happened, And just because of my state of mind at the time, and of course my wife remembers things a lot different than I do. She remembers things the way they really happened. So, I needed that help to put everything in perspective and that timeline, and to have feedback from not only my children, but my mom and my brother and my sister. It was just, it was just something that the time was right to do. I waited. I started this thing probably 5 years ago, and really got serious about it during COVID. Beginning of all that, so I had that opportunity, that downtime to really work on that, and it's been great. It's been great for us as a family to heal, even 13 years later. But it's been pretty popular out there. The reviews have been great.
Yeah, it's been selling.
Feedback.
Yeah, I've just looking up some of the numbers. I mean, people are taking advantage of the opportunity and the message that's in this book.
Well, and I tried to write it I tried to put something in there for everybody. Me and my wife have had the opportunity to do quite a few interventions across the country. And, that's kind of why we wrote our story that's paralleling a intervention that we're doing. Even though it's a fictitious intervention, the characters in there are all real. There's that codependent. There's that one that's angry. There's that one that doesn't believe it's a disease. There's that one that is a huge enabler. There's something in there for everybody. And, we're just real proud of the way it turned out.
You turned out great, but it was a long road to get there. And you started out with, the book is called Off Center. We can bring it back to that. You started off with a pretty grounded upbringing. When do you remember, alcohol or drugs becoming something that in your life where it had gained momentum? I mean, was there any time when you were
Well,
a kid growing up in Tyler, Texas?
no. Actually, there's not a lot of history in my family. I had a grandfather who was an alcoholic at one time, and he would come home drunk, and my grandmother would sew him up in a bed sheet and beat him with a broom.
Jeez.
And he eventually, he got sober, believe it or not. But there wasn't a lot of history of substance abuse in my family. Matter of fact, very little. And so there was really, I never saw my parents drink. My brother and sister never had an issue. It's something that wasn't part of the Grimes family. I mean, everything centered around football.
Did life come? Did football come easy to you?
Football came real easy to me. Not only me, but to my brother, my older brother. He played at Southern Arkansas, had a great college career. He was a great tight end. And, football just came easy for us. My dad was a parole officer in East Texas, and he really missed his calling, though. He should have been a coach. He coached all our teams growing up, all our Little League teams and baseball teams and everything. And, we were pretty much undefeated all those years. But he was a great coach, and he loved the game of football. I can remember sitting in his lap many times watching Dallas Cowboy games growing up in Tyler, Texas.
Well, and I love, I'm talking to you because of recovery and the message, the attractive message you have. But I'm also a football guy, so I'm interested about your recruiting process. You get recruited by pretty much all the major, Division I schools, and in your area, that's when the old Southwest Conference is in existence. And what are some of your memories of that recruitment process? Because this, Randy, I guess, what was your freshman year, 79 or 80?
Yeah, 79.
So this is when, it's the Wild West of recruiting, right?
Oh, yeah. And when you say all the D1 schools and all that, the only D1 schools that existed in my mind were Southwest Conference schools,
Yeah.
And I just wanted to play in the Southwest Conference, and to be recruited by most of those schools, that was a dream come true.
And for people that don't know, we're talking about Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, Baylor, SMU, right?
Yeah, but not Oklahoma.
Oh, they were Big Eight. Yeah. Okay.
And that was, that was Rice, Houston, SMU, TCU, Baylor, Tech, Arkansas, Texas, and A&M.
So what were your memories of some of that recruitment?
Oh, well, my first visit was to Rice, and I loved Rice. Rice had a great program. Of course, they took us out, and we had a really good time in the city of Houston. Being a kid from East Texas, I'd never really been out of East Texas. Going to the big city of Houston was a huge treat. But my second visit was 2 weeks later to Baylor, and man, when I walked out of Grant Taft's office after that visit, I knew where I wanted to go. And that's also where my mom wanted me to go. And she was so proud of the fact that I had that opportunity. I had a sister that was already there at Baylor. So that, I canceled all my other visits.
Really?
I called Coach Bill Lane, and he was the one that was recruiting me in East Texas. I said, you know what, this is the place for me. And I canceled my other visits, and I was a Baylor Bear from that day on.
What about Coach Taft was so attractive that you just knew you had to go there?
He was just like another father, It was just an immediate connection, and of course his spirituality and everything that he brought to that program. It wasn't just football; it was about being a better person and accomplishing goals and setting goals, and just being a better person. Off the field. He was as much interested in how you were developing off the field as you were on the field. And of course, after meeting and spending some time with Coach John O'Hara, who was the offensive line coach at the time, those were just the kind of guys that I wanted to be around. And of course, Baylor, the campus, and everything that was going on was awesome in itself. And I don't know if you noticed or not, but I met my wife the very first day, our freshman year.
Yes, I read that. That's like so your whole life, by the way, is like up to this point. I know I say it because I grew up in a nice family, and my parents did the best they could, but we had a pretty good upbringing. And I was an athlete too, played football, and it was like born on third base, thought I hit a triple. I heard somebody say that once in a meeting, and that I felt like that was me. And your story, and now I don't know you as a young man that maybe you were arrogant, but you certainly, football came easy. It seemed like life came easy. You go to campus, you meet your wife, right? You're at Baylor. Your teams are good. You're playing with Mike Singletary, with Walter Abercrombie. I mean, the Randy Grimes business is going pretty well.
Oh, it is. Yeah, there was no indication of what lied ahead for me. I married my wife after our junior year. We didn't have a pot to pee in or a window to throw it out of, but we got married anyway. And, things were – I wasn't even really thinking about the pros until about halfway through my junior year when I started seeing scouts come around and look. The year before, Singletary had gotten drafted and there was a lot of guys, Frank Pollard, a lot of guys that went to the pros after that year. And, I really started thinking, well, maybe, you just never know. And, I was fortunate enough to have a great junior and senior year, and the scouts came back around.
Yeah,
and we had some good athletes. We really had some great athletes on that 83 team.
And you go in the 83 draft, probably one of the most high-profile drafts in the history of pro football. Elway, Marino, all the rest.
I say that all the time. People have forgotten about that draft.
I'm just old enough where, that draft was unbelievable. And not just the quarterbacks. And you get taken in the second round. What was that experience like, that transition? I know you talk about your transition out of football, right? Like almost transitional trauma, and we'll get to that. But
Right.
your transition into pro football, how do you navigate those waters, and are you still staying out of trouble?
Well, wait, you're talking about into pro football?
Yeah, into pro football.
Well, transitioning into pro football, this is what it looked like. Me and my wife sitting in a one-bedroom efficiency on Fifth Street on the campus of Baylor University by phone, waiting for it to ring. Look how much different draft days are now. They're 3 or 4 day productions in Vegas with private jets and green rooms, and it's such a big deal now. But I was kicking my TV trying to get ESPN to work, and it's just me and her sitting by a telephone all morning. And finally, about 10 o'clock that morning, it rang. And I had thought that the Cowboys were going to draft me. Actually, I had gotten some indications from the agent that I'd hired that the Cowboys were going to draft me, and of course they went past me and did draft me. And pretty much the next draft, I forget the order that year, but pretty soon after that is when I got that call from Coach John McKay.
What was he like? He was a character, right?
Oh my God, I can still remember his old cigar-stained voice, saying, "Hey Randy, we just drafted you in the second, and see you tomorrow." Click. And I was like, "Whoa, wait, where's Tampa? I don't even know where that is."
And you get there, and they're it's unfortunate, right? You had a bunch of teams that didn't do so hot, but they were. I can just from an NFL film standpoint, Doug Williams. I remember they made the NFC Championship, and they were in the playoffs somewhat consistently a couple of years in a row, and then you get drafted, so you had to be excited.
Oh, I was. I thought I was going to a playoff team.
Yeah.
Little did I know what the next decade was going to want to hold,
We'll get back to this conversation in a second, but right now, a word from our sponsors.
You know what? I look back, and even Lydia, my wife, there's no place we would have rather been, and to raise our family. And, Tampa, although we had some pretty crappy teams, it was a great place to play football.
They love their Bucs.
They do. They came out and wearing their creamsicles, and it wasn't long before everybody was taking shirts off and drinking. It was a great place to drink beer, take your shirt off, and watch good football.
And so your life right now, you're telling this story, and it's like it's all sunshine, and then the clouds start to come in the world of pro football, because the dirty secret, and that still is today, kind of. You think about it, but your story is you got to stay on the field. You got to stay. You have to keep playing. You know, your best abilities sometimes is availability, because if you're in the training room, you're not going to, you're just not going to last long in the NFL if you're hurt in the training room. And that was your experience. What happens as far as drugs coming into play? You know, how does that take place in your life and in your career?
Well, and when I got to Tampa, I had a locker next to Leroy Selman. You know, that in itself was just mind blowing to me. The fact that here I am dressing next to somebody I've been watching on TV. You know, it's one of the greats of the game, one of the all time greats, a Hall of Famer. And the first thing I learned from Leroy was in some of those deep talks we used to have. And this is like at mini camp before training camp even started. In my rookie year was, you do whatever you have to. Well, the first thing he taught me was football was not a game anymore. It was now a job. And that was hard for me to wrap my head around for a while, because up until then, football had been such a game, The pressures of a job weren't really on me until I got to one Buck place.
And you were a center too, so there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that job.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're feeding your family now, which is everything, All your goals, all your dreams are wrapped up in that uniform, and it definitely is a job. And the second thing I learned from Leroy was you do whatever you have to stay out on the field, because if you ever got a reputation of always being on the injury report or always being worked on by the trainers or always missing practice or something like that, you were sure to have a short NFL career. So I'm sure Leroy didn't mean to take a handful of pain pills every day to get through practice and a handful of sleeping pills to get sleep at night. I'm sure he didn't mean that, but I was willing to do whatever I had to stay out on the field, and that's how I justified it. I looked at it more like a necessary evil.
Did you take anything before you played to enhance your?
No.
Okay, so it was strictly.
But I never had the injuries that I did. I mean, when we got to Tampa, when we got in the pros, we used to beat the hell out of each other all week long. And not that we didn't do that at Baylor, but in the pros, the game is just so much bigger, faster, stronger. And, it was that, I call it that Bear Bryant junction boy mentality, where if you don't practice good, you're not going to play good. So coaches would just, they would just wear you out all week, and hopefully there was enough left in the tank to play on Sundays. And I never understood that coaching philosophy, but I didn't have any say in it, so I did it. I wanted to keep the job. So
when do you start? When's the first injury or the first time you can remember, taking these prescription drugs and then maybe abusing them off the field?
Well, and I can remember having multiple ankle injuries early in my career, and those are things that I would just tape it up even tighter, and then just take a handful of opiates and just practice through it or play through it and all that. That probably started my second year in. But again, I looked at it like a necessary evil, and I was getting it from the team doctors. So that's how I was justifying it, or I was getting it from the trainers. Hey, we had an open narcotics safe that was in the middle of our training room that was always open. You could just go get whatever you wanted to out of there. And if it ever was accidentally locked, we had 3 white guys that started on defense, and their jersey numbers were the combination to the safe the whole decade I was there.
So the access was not an issue.
Access was not an issue, and that was another way that I justified what I was calling just a necessary evil, because I wanted to be the best, and I wanted that next big contract. I wanted to be all pro. I wanted to be a Pro Bowler. I wanted to feed my family. I wanted to be the best sitter that ever played the game.
And you're mixing it up with guys like Jerry Ball, right? Like just guys up front that are just nasty.
Oh, Joe Klecko, Jim Burt, Michael Carter, Randy. My first start in the league was against Randy White at left guard, a position I'd never even played in my life at Texas Stadium. So, yeah, I mean, those were the kind of men, that there was no Sundays off in the NFL.
And how is it affecting you off the field? Are you still taking them when the season ends now that your career's picking up and you're accustomed to taking them?
Oh, yeah, because, the injuries would just get worse, or, the chronic pain never went away. And, the benzos at night, back then it was Halcyon, which is, the granddaddy of Xanax. It was that kind of stuff that was getting me to sleep at night when everything was throbbing. So, it was kind of a dual addiction there that I always say that opiates stole everything from me, but the benzodiazepines are what nearly killed me.
And so how much are you taking a day?
As much as I could get my hands on. I mean, my tolerance just kept getting higher and higher. I needed more and more pills. So, I was taking 45, 60 pills a day, no problem.
Anybody ever tell you, anybody on your team, a coach, I'm sure your wife did, so not her, but any teammates say, hey, you might need to slow it down? Or was it just kind of like, don't ask, don't tell, we're all doing this?
Well, it's funny, and I say this all the time, not once in that 8.5 years probably that was going on did anybody ever say, Randy, why are you slurring your words? Or Randy, why are you nodding off in meetings? Or why are you late to practice every day? Or why are you the last to leave the building every night and pills are missing out of the safe? Nobody ever asked me that because I was always playing good.
Yeah.
And if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, and you were the centerpiece, literally, to the Bucs offensive line. You had what, 5 coaches in 10 years?
I had 5 head coaches, 6 different offensive line coaches, and probably 10 different quarterbacks.
Who's your favorite coach? Your favorite head coach?
Believe it or not, even though he worked us like mules, was Coach Perkins.
Ray Perkins?
Yeah, Ray Perkins. He was. I was kind of his guy, and if he ever needed anything done with the team, and I was the team captain at that time and everything. So, but I had some good times with Coach Perkins. But like I said, he worked us like mules.
And let me ask you this: one more highlight.
He really was that Bear Bryant mentality.
Yeah, he really was, right? Yeah, that's where he was from. You in 1988. And this is, maybe it's a contradiction, maybe it isn't. You win NFL Man of the Year. Now at this time, I'm guessing you are
right.
Full blown addict stage.
Yes, but I hit it well. My wife never really caught on because me coming home tired, beat up, dehydrated, completely a wreck was not unusual because she knew our practice schedule.
Yeah.
And for me to collapse on the bed or on the couch or to not be present, mentally with everybody was not a big red flag for her. Because, it was 120 degrees out on the field or on the turf, and coming home all beat up and not wanting to talk or just crashing and not engaging with my family was not unusual back then. So that wasn't a red flag.
So you win the Man of the Year, and things are still going well. I'm guessing, obviously, right? And your career is still kind of, it's together as you kind of move into the 90s. When did you notice, like, okay, my play is starting to erode, or did you not feel that way?
Well, I don't think that my play ever did erode, but the last 2 years of my career, I was playing entire games in a blackout.
Really?
I mean, it would be 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night at home, and I would be laying on the couch. And, after playing a 1 o'clock game somewhere in the country or at home, and I would start kind of coming out of it, kind of waking up, and I'd be all beat up and scratched up and, fingernails all torn up and dehydrated and everything you are after an NFL game. And I didn't remember any of it. I played every down at start and center. And, here I am, the quarterback of the offensive line. I'm audible in blocking schemes. I'm getting guys going in the right direction. I'm having to listen to the quarterback for his audibles and the snap count and execute plays. And I was doing all this, but I was doing it in a complete blackout.
What the hell do you make of that now that you sit back sober?
Well, you know what it is? It's the insanity of addiction.
Yeah.
And even though this was happening, I wasn't willing to stop because I was always playing good. I didn't even remember how I played on that Monday morning, and I would go in and watch the film, and I played my ass off.
Oh, man.
it's insane, but that's the insanity of the addiction. And and at that point, it was still a necessary evil. I never expected to take it into my retired life.
Yeah, and so that's and that's where we'll go right now. Sam White, who I've come to understand wasn't your favorite coach, right? I mean, you felt like
let's just say out of the five, he would have been number
5. So he's the guy that lets you go, and walk us through that whole process for people that don't know what life in the NFL can be like.
Well, and I'd gotten hurt halfway through that season. I dislocated my ankle, and that was really my first. Well, I had ruptured a tricep a couple of years before, but I came back from that and got my position back and everything. And then that last year, halfway through that year, I dislocated my ankle, and that was really my first huge injury that kept me out, or pretty much, I couldn't come back from. And, back then, after your last game, if you weren't going to playoffs, you'd come in after your Sunday game. You'd come in on Monday, and, you'd have an exit meeting with your coach. You'd watch the film from the day before, and clean out your locker, and you'd pretty much leave town until minicamp started up again in the spring. Now it's more of a year-round job. But back then, when football was over, you were out of there. Everybody was packing up and leaving. See you at minicamp. But this particular year, after the last game of the 92 season, I came in to clean my locker out. I hadn't played in half the year. And yeah, Sam Lash came up behind me, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "We won't be needing your services anymore." And before I can even turn around and look, see who it was, he was exiting the door that was right next to my locker, out of the locker room. And I can remember thinking, wow, that's how it ends. All the blood, sweat, and tears that I've left on football fields all over this country since 4th grade, and that's how it ends. And it's not like I expected to have a parade or a expressway named after me, but I just didn't think it would end like that. And I just kind of raked everything out of my locker into a black trash bag and walked out the back door. And Randy Grimes, a football player, didn't exist anymore. I struggled with that for a long time.
What happens?
Trying to figure out who I was when I didn't have that uniform anymore, or that playbook, or that itinerary, or that identity, that went with being not a former, but an NFL football player.
In 1992, this is the year that your football career ends. Did you make an attempt to play with any other team, or did you retire after that?
I couldn't go try out. I had to try out that off season for all the teams, and my ankle just wouldn't let me. So I knew it was over.
And you know what's funny, man?
I had a brief appearance with the Oilers for a quick tryout, and I had my ankle taped up as tight as it would go, and but I just couldn't perform.
And it's funny, the stuff you fought, and you took the drugs so you could stay on the field. Like, that's literally how it ended. And when you could no longer remain on the field, that's when they let you go. I mean, it was like your worst fear come to reality.
Exactly. And even though I had a good 9.5-year career, I just wasn't. I thought I was ready. You think you're ready every off season. You think you're getting ready to live a normal life and all that, but until it really happens, you don't know how you're going to react. And I call it transitional trauma, like you said earlier. And I didn't transition well when I didn't have all that. And when the injuries just kept getting worse, the chronic pain just kept getting worse, the addiction just kept getting worse. And now I didn't have all those ways to justify it, because I wasn't getting it out of the narcotic safe anymore. I wasn't getting it from the team doctors. I was doctor shopping all over Houston, Texas. That was a full-time job. And that's where I retired back to. And the new normal in my life for the next decade plus was emergency rooms and ambulance rides and repossessed cars and foreclosed homes. I couldn't stop the insanity. That was that necessary evil that I called it. That was really just a full-blown addiction to opiates and benzos.
And now it's really not necessary, right? Because you're not playing anymore. So
Well, I kept justifying it though because the injuries were still there.
Mm-hmm.
The
Okay.
pain was still there, But no, it wasn't necessary to feed my family. No.
You talk about benzos were a huge part of it. How bad did that get? Because I've just heard nightmare stories, and I know you were having a lot like seizures every so often.
Oh yeah, every time I would run out of those things, I would have a seizure. That was scary because that could have happened at any time. And I'll tell you how insane addiction is. I would drive all over Houston, Texas, looking for more benzos just so I wouldn't have a seizure, knowing that I could have a seizure at any second driving my car. I was just that desperate to not have a seizure. I was just that desperate to. It got that bad, and only by the grace of God did I not ever hurt somebody else or myself in the car.
What were some of the bottoms for you? I mean, when did you finally get that gift of desperation?
Man, there were so many bottoms. Every bottom I hit had a trap door, and I would always go deeper. Losing jobs, going through all my money, losing relationships, like I said, cars and houses, and putting my family through all that. That was the worst of it. But Pete, I couldn't stop it. Looking back now, why didn't I stop at that first seizure? Why didn't I stop at that first lost job? Because I had some great jobs, and after football, I had some great jobs. I had some great friends, and lost them all because of the addiction. Why couldn't I stop that after that first seizure or that first hospital detox? Why couldn't I stop that? But that's the insanity of this disease.
And your good friend and teammate, right? Tom McHale passes away.
Right.
And
I played next to Tom for many years, and he was doing the same thing I was doing. That was self-medicating his injuries he got while he played with the Bucs. And one morning, he just didn't wake up.
And how do you take that news? I mean, does that move you to get into recovery, or to at least, I don't know, become willing, as we say?
Yeah, well, it started the process, I think. It scared me. And also, the amount of seizures that I was having, and those things just come on. You don't know. You don't know they're coming. They can just happen at any time. The fact that my daughter wouldn't let me come around my first grandchild because I wasn't fit to be around her new baby, and the fact that my wife had to take a step back because she felt like she was loving me to death and she couldn't stand it anymore. She couldn't watch it happen anymore. She had done everything she felt like she could do to save me, and I wouldn't save myself. So that was the perfect storm that was coming together in the spring and summer of 2009, and that's when I finally put up my hand and asked for help.
So,
a lot of that was guilt, shame, maybe pride, ego. That's when I look back and think, what kept me out there so long, and those are the only four things I can think of.
And in that fall of 2009, what happens? How do you get? I mean, you literally crawl into a treatment center. I mean, how does that come together?
There wasn't anything out there for former NFL players then, and my wife was willing to make more and more calls for me. And whoever she called at the league office in New York, up on Park Avenue, just happened to know somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody, and that's how I got on that airplane to Florida, and that was September 22nd, 2009. And yeah, I got picked up at the airport there in Fort Lauderdale. It's an old dirty black town car. I remember how stinky it was and everything in that back seat. And I figured out halfway up to the treatment center why it was so stinky. It's because it picked up people like me all day.
Oh.
But I was leaning against the door when we pulled into the treatment center, and somebody opened it from outside. And I was so sick, man. I just fell out of that car, and there's about another 30 feet to the front door, and I crawled on all fours. And I talk about that all the time. That's my greatest accomplishment, was crawling in the door that night. Because if I don't do that, then everything else was for nothing.
What happens to you when you get in? Because I know I mean, we all have the same story, but they're different, right? And it's like,
Right.
I can so relate. I battled for so long, or tried. I took a couple stabs at getting sober, but man, when I got into this treatment facility, 10, 11 years ago, I was done. I mean, the moment I came to, after like the detox and stuff, which some of that stuff can be real heavy duty. I was done, or I guess I'll say this: I was willing to take direction. Is that what happened with you? Like, did you start to say, "Hey, I need to listen to these people"? Because that's what changed my life.
Yeah. And, a lot of people call it desperation, and it is desperation, but I guess with me, it was more surrender. I give up. I've been to a treatment facility before, but I didn't come into it with that same desperation that I came into this one when I crawled in the door that night. And I heard somebody say, and I don't remember much about that night, but I heard somebody say, Randy, in order to get this, you've got to have the desperation of a drowning man. And, I talk about this all the time. My most vivid memory as a kid is 8 years old in Tyler, Texas, out at Tyler State Park. And I'd fallen off one of those paddle boats, those little 2-man paddle boats that you paddle with your feet.
Yeah.
And I'd gotten my feet caught up in something on the bottom of the lake. And I remember how desperate I was, how I nearly drowned, how I clawed at the water, and how I'm screaming underwater, and how hard I fought to get back to the surface. And that all came flooding back to me when I heard that night. You got to have the desperation of a drowning man. And I knew that I was in for the fight of my life. And, but like I said, it was also my greatest accomplishment.
How did you adjust to that new life? Because people know who you are. And this is for, this podcast is just like you do with all your speaking and stuff. And, you're helping athletes in recovery. And all your stuff, by the way, we'll put in the show notes so people can click on those links. But how do you, just a person, anybody, whether they're an NFL player or a stockbroker or a garbage man, how do you reintegrate, into life again, in recovery? Was that a daunting task for you?
Well, I knew that my biggest problem was I had to stay accountable. So that's why I started recovering out loud and telling my story to anybody that.
How quickly did you come out like, hey, this is my deal? Like right away?
Pretty much right away. Yeah. I remember. Well, I'll tell you what. I remember it was exactly 2 weeks into the process, and I was sitting at a picnic table in the middle of the campus, and I was fixing to get a knee replaced. I had a knee replaced while I was in treatment. And but before that, they had to detox me off all those opiates and benzos that I was taking. So it was exactly 2 weeks into that first detox, and I was sitting at this table and I was sobbing uncontrollably. Man, I couldn't get a grip on myself because, really for the first time in 20 plus years, I was having to deal with life on life's terms and deal with all the huge wake of destruction that I left in my life back in Houston. And not just, my reputation, my finances, my family, everything. And I had to deal with that clean and sober for the first time. And I couldn't stop crying. But, Pete, at that very second that all that was going on, and this was my big burning bush moment in recovery, it was like somebody came up behind me and draped a warm quilt over my shoulders. And I say quilt because I remember feeling weight and warmth. And not only did I had this overwhelming confidence that I could do this, but that I had to make it mean something. And that was kind of the birth of Athletes in Recovery right then, because I knew there was a lot of guys that I'd played with and against who were out there struggling just like I was. And for whatever reason, pride, ego, guilt, shame, they weren't putting their hand. But usually it was because they didn't think there was any resources available to them. So I didn't know then what Athletes in Recovery was going to be. I didn't even have a name for it. I just knew I wanted to give it back away. You can't keep it unless you give it away.
How did you handle?
So that was I knew I still had a lot of work to do on myself first.
How did you handle getting back? You're doing the work on yourself, but you mentioned in some of the things that happened to us in addiction. I think one of the things you mentioned that hit my heart was you mentioned your daughter not allowing you to see your first grandchild. I remember one of the turning points for me was my brother Michael. He had a stepson that, as far as I was concerned, he didn't even like. And he said, "You can't see my kids. You can't see Cade anymore." And I remember thinking, like, damn, he doesn't even want me to see Cade. I was like, this is bad, But like for you, it's a little more gut wrenching, right? Like, your grandchild. How do you find your way back into the lives of your family? You get your wife back. All this stuff happens to us, but it's a slow burn a lot of times, right? It doesn't happen overnight. How did you work through all that stuff?
Yeah, and I think, sometimes we think we go off to treatment and we get well and we're going to ride back in like a knight on a white horse and everything's going to be great and everybody's going to say, "Hey, look at him. He looks awesome. He's back, blah, blah, blah." Well, it doesn't happen like that. There's a lot of healing that needs to go on, and it doesn't just happen overnight. We go off to treatment, we get all this therapy, we get well, we come back, we're looking great, we've got all the color back in our skin, we're healthy, and everybody at home has been sitting in the mess that you created. So I talk a lot about it with that, or talk about that a lot with the athletes or anybody. Excuse me. Anybody else that's going through this process, there's a lot of healing that needs to go on back home. But, families have to be willing to accept that healing too. They have to be willing to do the therapy and do the groups and do the Al-Anon and all that. There's got to be a willingness on their part to get well too, and not just think that, you can that it's just all over after 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. Whenever your loved one comes back from treatment, it's not over. That's when it's just beginning. And you got to have families that are willing to do that. And, I was one of the lucky ones. I had a family that was willing to do that work. And it didn't happen overnight, but, as a matter of fact, we still talk about it today. There's things that come up, or we'll remember back or when we're helping somebody else, some of those old feelings come back up, and it's a process, and it's a lifelong process.
Yeah, it's funny. I think, like, for me to become comfortable with the fact that I'm not a finished product, has really helped me a lot in recovery. It's like, oh yeah, like I continue to grow, or I continue to process stuff that happened to me years ago. It's still I'm still thawing out, and that's cool. It's as long as I keep working a program and doing my thing. Were incredibly successful, and I'll let you out of here. Only got about 10 more minutes. You were incredibly successful as an athlete, and a lot of people, I think, who are trying to get sober again. I think I heard you say it. How do you say it from what is it, the schoolyard to the graveyard? I forget what it was. One of those things where it's like from Yale to jail, or anybody, right, can be subject to this. How do you talk to other athletes about that? Because you get people with incredible accomplishments and success, but now they got to admit defeat. The ego has to be smashed. How do you get through to those folks that's the right thing to do, or how do you show them to do it?
Well, like I said earlier, I think accountability is huge, but also the fact that, you convince people that not only is this a disease, but it happens to good people. The people that I've helped are Hall of Famers. They're some of the greatest in their sports. And, this happens to good people, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. But I guess the message is that it's okay to not be okay, but you got to put your hands up and ask for help. And it's funny that God chose this. God knows how much I love football, and He chose this as a way to keep me connected to the game that I love so much. He allowed me to help the NFL start the Player Care Foundation and start reaching out to these guys. And these guys just wanted to know that there was other people out there like them, people that were struggling with life after football or struggling with their injuries they got while they were in the league. They just wanted to know that there was other people out there like that. So when I started getting out and telling my story, then they started coming out of the woodwork, and not just the NFL, but Major League Baseball and hockey and basketball. Pretty much every sport you can think of that has an organization that supports their former players is who I started work with. From MMA to the Jockey's Guild.
Wow.
So it goes across the board, and Park Avenue to Park Bench. I
That's
think is
it.
what I said.
Yeah.
That this affects people from all walks of life. Whether you're a Hall of Fame quarterback or somebody that's a painter driving down the road who has an accident. Next thing you know, you're hooked on opiates. That's the kind of thing that happens to us. But there's hope and help out there, and you got to want it. And hopefully you don't hit all the bottoms that you and I had to hit. That's the message. Is let's get this now, because it's not going to get any better. And what I can promise you is that it will get worse.
How important was it for you to have other players come before you? You talked a little bit about Pat Summerall. He was a guy who, long-term recovery guy, got sober, died sober, right? But was he part of that sober fraternity of athletes that kind of had their hand out to help you when you started to speak up?
Absolutely. Between him and Coach Dipka and all that, it was my. It made it, I had heard that this happens to great people, but I hadn't really seen it until those guys started coming towards. I mean, not that Coach Dipka's in recovery, but Pat was. And Coach Dipka was just a great supporter of everything that I was doing, because he knew the struggles that his players were going through. And so, it was, it's hard to describe. I guess it was more of a relief to have that realization that, hey, this can happen to Pat Summerall, that's true. Then I can beat this too. And, Pat was, he was a great mentor. It was just, it was awesome to experience that.
What can you tell the story about Pat Summerall making the 12-step call on his neighbor?
Oh, yeah, man. He told me this story. I'd just gotten sober, and I'd hooked up with him down at the Super Bowl in Miami. I was sitting at a table with Conrad Dobler, and I wasn't sure that I could go on the radio or do all the interviews, the media interviews on Radio Row that I was going to do that day. I just wasn't sure I could do that, because that was the first time I'd really talked, on that kind of platform about my recovery and everything that I'd been through. But yeah, Pat Summerall, I saw him down there, and we reconnected, after a lot of years of my active addiction that I hadn't connected with him. We reconnected down there, and he told me a story about his neighbor in Dallas, and how his neighbor was having an organ failure, and how he was on his third marriage, and his new wife was his drinking buddy and all that. And he felt like he needed to do something for his neighbor. And so he got some guys together from his home group there, and they went over and did a 12-step call on him. And it was Mickey Mantle. And 90 days later, when Mickey Mantle walked out of the Betty Ford clinic, and this is all coming from Pat, so he tells it a lot better than I do. But, 90 days later, when Mickey's walking out of the Betty Ford clinic, there was a crowd of people waiting outside. And he could have gone out the back door because there was a car waiting for him. But he chose to go up to this crowd out in the front door. This was back in the early 80s. HIPAA wasn't a big deal back then. He walked out that front door and approached the crowd, and somebody hollered, Mickey, what do you most want to be remembered for? And everybody was expecting some baseball-related statistic or something. But he said, I want people to realize, I want people to understand that my greatest accomplishment in life was getting clean and sober. And the best of my knowledge, or best of anybody's knowledge, Mickey Mantle died sober.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. But, I tell that story back when I crawled through the doors, because, and I always considered myself a pretty tough guy. And, I've been in a lot of battles and won most of them. You don't get to stay in the NFL for 10 years unless you're winning most of them.
Yeah.
crawling in the door that night was the hardest thing that I ever did, but it was also the most rewarding. And I kind of feel like Mickey Mantle walking up to that crowd, and saying that, when I crawled in the door that night. That's my greatest accomplishment.
You do. You still are accomplished now as a speaker, right? You talked about the interventions. Your wife, Lydia, is like the best teammate you ever had, I would guess.
She's the hero of my story, man.
Yeah. I mean, you got what's that relationship look like today, and what does it mean to you?
Oh, it's awesome, and the fact that we're able to give back. She uses her experience, I use my experience, and the fact that we're able to give back. Because I did learn, one of the first things I ever learned in recovery was, in order to keep it, you got to give it away, and that's what I've always tried to do. Not only have I tried to stay accountable and let everybody in the world know what I've been through and what I'm going through now to keep me accountable, but also, you got to give it away. You got to give it back. And that's been the most important part of our lives. And, she helps wives or spouses or families. And, she's just so good. She can relate to that population so well, and they can relate to her.
What do you tell the person?
I said, man, she's the hero. She's the hero of my story.
That's so great, dude. That puts that warm cloak over me, when you say that. What do you tell somebody that doesn't know what to do, that has a problem with addiction, but they're at that jumping off point. You can't live with it, can't live without it. What do you tell that person?
Just what I said earlier, that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay that you're going through this, but you got to put your hand up for help. A lot of people use fear as an excuse to not go through this process, and this is nothing to be scared of. And recovery works. There's hope. There's help out there, but you got to put your hand up and ask for it. And it's available. Because like I said, the only thing I can promise you about addiction, other than there is recovery if you work at it, is that it will get worse. And this thing only winds up in active addiction only winds up in one of three ways, and that's hospital, jail, or death.
Yeah. No, and we see it all around us now, and the stakes are so high now with all the drugs and stuff.
Oh my gosh, it's one and done now.
Yeah.
You don't have that luxury, and we're losing an entire generation of young people right in front of our eyes. I saw something the other day. It was like, I think I read like 19 million people battle cancer every year, and like 26 million people battle heart or diabetes, and then like 29 million battle heart disease, but 40 million people battle addiction every day in this country. And the overdose number this year, you're going to hear like 120 or something like that, but the experts say it's closer to 200,000. That's the most unreported number in the country, and that's what a couple of jumbo airline plane crashes a day. And if it was something like that, it would be in the news every night. But because it's addiction, and there's such stigma that surrounds addiction, you don't hear that much about it. There's not enough money that goes towards it, and with all this stuff pouring across our borders, and we're an addicted nation, We self-medicate, and we won't legislate our way out of this, and we won't arrest our way out of it, but we can educate our way out of it. That's what me and Lydia try to do all the time, is just try to reduce that stigma that keeps people from raising their hands, or keeps families from raising their hands and asking for help.
Do you feel like now that we're post-COVID, you're finally back out on the road a lot, talking and stuff? Does that feel good?
Oh yeah, it does. There's nothing better than that interaction.
Yeah, I mean
Zoom was good for about a week.
Now, let me ask you this one thing. For the Bucs, did you ever know Gary Horton?
Why does that name sound familiar?
He was a scout with the Bucs. I worked for him back in the day.
Yes, I do know him.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that name in forever.
Yeah, he was a guy who
was kind of a
heavy set
guy with blonde curly hair.
Yeah. He was a great man. He gave me some opportunities early on.
I've heard that name in years.
Yeah, he gave me some opportunities early on, and he was one of those guys I kind of burned through addiction, and have since made amends. I don't keep too close contact with him, but he was a good man, and I figured he loved Coach McKay, and he was at the forefront of the whole Bucs organization, and he just loved Tampa Bay, loved that organization, and loved guys like you.
Man, we had some great athletes. We never won any games. We were a horrible team, but man, we had some great athletes, and we played some good football.
Hey, anything else before I let you go? Anything else for anybody in recovery? I'll put all the links in the show notes and stuff like that.
No, I appreciate you talking about Off Center, the book, and you can go to offcenter.com, and that'll take you to the Amazon link that you can order. But yeah, Coach Dicka wrote the foreword for it. There's a lot of great endorsements in there. Coach Taft, Coach Sherrill, a lot of really cool stuff in the book, and I hope everybody gets the opportunity to read it. And also my proathletesinrecovery.org. The work that I do with athletes or anybody else, not just athletes, I do here at White Sands Treatment Center here in Tampa and Fort Myers.
That's terrific, dude. Randy, thank you so much for carrying the message, man.
Oh man, I'm honored. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you got it. And I'll tell Christine, my buddy down here in Waco, I'll tell her you said hey.
Yeah, please do.
All right, brother. Thanks a lot, Randy.
All right, buddy. Thank you very much.
All right, see you, man. Thanks so much for listening to the Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.